Welcome to Conversations. I'm Muqtadar Khan, your host, and today I want to talk to you about what is happening in the global shift in manufacturing. As you know, that there's a lot of talk about how China has developed this extraordinary capacity for manufacturing. 50% of the global manufacturing capacity is in China now, and the of China seems to be to become and remain and dominate as the factory of the world. It has created a lot of tensions, particularly with Europe, because Europe feels that it is becoming deindustrialized as a result of the rising Chinese manufacturing, subsidized by the state, with better technology, better products, undoubtedly, and this working on very narrow margins. Chinese manufacturers are basically destroying various industries in many countries. So those countries which are capable of pushing back politically, such as the United States, which has simply imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, for example. I was in China and I saw the BYD, and I can tell you that if I had an option to buy a BYD over Tesla, most probably I would have bought a BYD. So if BYD was being sold in the US without 100% tariffs, I guarantee you they would have wiped out all other electric vehicles in the US. So similarly, many countries which are not able to push back against China, like US and European Union, their industries are in the danger of disappearing. We can see that in the case of India alone. For example, India, uh, uh, 5 years ago, India's exports to China and Hong Kong were about 27 billion dollars. Now it's 25, so it's declined. So India's exports to Hong Kong and China have declined significantly, well, not significantly, by 4%. 25, 2 on 25, so about 8%. But what is also interesting is that India's imports from China have gone from 70 billion to over 170 from both China and Hong Kong combined. So yes, you can see that even robust economies like India are becoming more and more dependent on China's manufacturing capacity. So what I'm going to do today is look at the hard data. So I'm going to look at the share of the top 10 countries in global manufacturing. Okay. And I will show you how that has changed in the past 25 years and how the the center of global manufacturing has shifted from the West or G7 to BRICS and Asia. But I was actually quite surprised by when I noticed that the shift doesn't seem to be as dramatic as when people talk about it. So first thing that I want to say is I was surprised to see how robust G7 countries are. For those of you who are watching this show or listening to this show, I would recommend that you watch it, whether it's on your phone or on your television or your desktop, because I'm going to show you a lot of data. And so if you're just listening, it may not make sense to you. And for those of you who are watching from India, I want to also let you know that a very distinguished economist will be joining me in 2 or 3 days to do this show in Hindi. And he has some interesting explanations as to why these shifts are happening. But that we will discuss when we record the show with him. But for now, let me show you what the shifts are. And this is very interesting. So I know this sheet is very complicated, so let me just walk you guys through what I am showing. So in this sheet, what you're seeing is basically you're seeing data for 3 years, for the year 2000, for the year 2010, and for the year 2025. So in 2000, the United States was the number one manufacturing country in the world. It was contributing 26% of the global manufacturing, not the global GDP. So US manufacturing was 26% of global manufacturing, which means 1 out of all 4 things that were manufactured on planet Earth were manufactured in the United States. I mean, that's an amazing industrial domination. This is just 2000. I was here in the US. I became a professor in 2000. And so to me, that data. I knew that the U.S. was number one, but I didn't realize. In fact, I'm one of the few people who continues to talk about the U.S. as the second biggest manufacturing country in the world, even today. So if you look at the US in 2010, it went down and became number two, and its share went down from 26 to 17%, and China overtook the US in 2010 with 19% of the global manufacturing share. So basically, what it means is that while in 2000, one out of four things that were made in the world were made in the US, in 2010, one out of five things that were made in the world were made in China. But now, if you look at 2025, China continues to dominate. So one out of three things are now made in China. So China today is more dominant in manufacturing than the US was in 2000. If you go back about 80 years, in 1950s, after World War II, the US share of manufacturing and the GDP was 50% of the global GDP. So one out of two things that were made in the world were made in the US, but that was in the 1950s. And the US share declined and then went up again. And as you can see, 2000 was not, it was quite impressive, and it still is. Even now, you can say that one out of six items that are made in the world are made in the US. So 16 to 17% of the global GDP, manufacturing GDP, not the total GDP, just the manufacturing part of it is still in the US. I don't know why we talk about the US as if manufacturing in the US has ended. Germany is not a very interesting country. It just remains it's the number one European manufacturing country. But look at the story of Japan, which was number two in 2000. It was contributing. It was like China was in 2010. So one out of five things were made in Japan in 2000. It was 19%. Then it dropped to 11%. So roughly one out of nine items were made in Japan. That's a steep decline from 2000 to 2010 in terms of, and remember, these are relative declines. That's another point I would like to make, but I will do that towards the end. So Japan went from making one out of five things in the world to one out of nine things. And now Japan is at roughly 5%. So one out of 20 items that are manufactured in the world are manufactured in Japan. So Japan's share of the global manufacturing has definitely declined significantly from 20% roughly in 2000 to 5% in 2025. Now, if you look at 2000 itself, what impressed me most was that all the G7 countries were part of 2000 are in the top 10. So US, Japan, Germany, UK, France, Italy, Canada. These are G7 countries. All seven of them are in the top 10 share of manufacturing. In fact, Canada was also, even though it just manufactured one out of 50 items, but it was more than the rest of the world. So it's in the top 9. And if you look at it, there are only 3 Asian countries, which is Japan, China, which was number 4, and South Korea. So basically, you had 7 G7 countries, 3 Asian countries. Japan has a double role here, and Brazil. So there were 2 BRICS countries, China and Brazil, even though no one had started talking about BRICS at that moment. India does not show up in the top 10 manufacturing in terms of share, but India shows up in 2010. In the 2010, the balance of power shifts, and you have China number 1, US 2, Japan 3, Germany. So basically, everybody went one step down, with China going one step up. So Japan went from 2 to 3, Germany went from 3 to 4. And then you suddenly see South Korea moving from 8 to 5. You have Italy, France going below Italy passing it, UK declining from number 5 to number 8, and at number 9, India shows up, and Brazil. So 2010 was a good year for BRICS because now there are 3 BRICS countries. That is why the excitement about BRICS. So you have China, you have India, and you have Brazil. And in terms of G7 countries, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So for the first time, one of the BRICS countries drops out of top 10. G7 countries drops out, which is Canada. And now, if you look at 2025, it is stunning to me that yes, there are now 1, 2, 3, 4 Asian countries: China, Japan, India, and South Korea. The US is still the second biggest manufacturing giant at 16 to 17% of the global share. It is still 5 times bigger than India, which is at number 5 position. But in terms of G7 countries, Germany retains its. So you have 2, 3, 4 is or G7. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Italy is 4, and France. So only 5 G7 countries are there. But I'm still surprising to me that we still have. It is the UK which has dropped. UK is still there. So you have UK, France, Italy 3. Germany, Japan, and US 7. So out of G7, you have 6 of them are still there. So this is something very remarkable to me, that the G7, in spite of the so-called decline of manufacturing, etc., still remain in the top 10. So basically, in the last 25 years, G7 went from being all 7 being in the top 10 to at least 6 being in the top 10 consistently. In the terms of BRICS, we were 2 in 2000, 3 in 2010, and then with Brazil again dropping out after 2010, now you see that there are only 2 BRICS countries in the top 10 in terms of sharing of manufacturing. But China's share has gone up significantly, and we will talk about that subsequently. I do want to show you the same data in a slightly different chart, so you can fully appreciate that as to the kind of impact it is having. So this is the global manufacturing analysis for just 2025, which gives you a relative perspective between these countries. So you can see China is at 30% of the global manufacturing, like 1 out of 3. The US is at 16.5. Japan is 4.5. And so the Chinese share is more than the combination of the next 4 countries: 16.5, 13.5, 20, 28. So if you take number 2, 3, 4, 5, which is US, Japan, Germany, and India, it comes to about 28, 29% of the global manufacturing, and China is more than that. So the biggest shift really has been in this phenomenal rise of China, especially since 2010. And now I'm going to show you a data which is a bit more complicated. So I want first let me summarize what we have seen. So this is a summary of the data. 2000, the US was so dominant at 26%, and then it began to decline. China began to rise. So China is now at 31%. So the tables have been turned. Asian share in 2000, there was only 1 of 2 economies really, but that has really risen. There are only 2 BRICS now. There are only 2 BRICS in 2000. So in terms of nominal GDPs, the BRICS countries don't show up, and we will talk about that when Santosh Mehrotra Sahab, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra, shows up on my show in a couple of days. We'll talk a little bit more about that angle. I also want to share with you what is happening now with individual countries. That is important. So this data is a little bit complicated. This is for individual countries. And so we will quickly go through these individual country data. And for those of you who like to, if you can pause and take screenshots of this data if you're interested, that is fine. It is available as both bar graphs and just infographic. So the data about individual countries. Now, this data is not share of the global economy. Please keep it in mind. In this data, what I'm trying to show to you is the share of each country's own GDP. So Take the case of China in this case. So if you look at China in 2000, China was number 4, and it had some what was the data? China was number 4, and China's share was about 6-7% of the global GDP. So in 2000, China's share of the global GDP was less than 10%, but the manufacturing contributed to 32% of China's national GDP. So its economy was being driven significantly by manufacturing. And then you see in 2010, China becomes the number 1 country with roughly 20% of the global manufacturing. But the share of manufacturing inside China goes down from 32 to 31%. And then in subsequent 15 years, China goes from being slightly better than the US to a dominant 1/3, which is 30% of the global manufacturing. The share of manufacturing in China's national GDP goes down to 24.7%. Now, that is an interesting. So you see, in terms of percentages, the share of manufacturing in national economies is going down, and the share of manufacturing in the global is rising like a rocket for China. What does that really mean? What it means is that countries, as they develop, they go through these 3 stages, where first, the most important component or share of your global GDP comes from agriculture. Okay, you are a non-industrial country, so agriculture dominates, and most of the jobs are in the agricultural sector. As you become industrialized, then people move from the farm to the factory, and the share of manufacturing and the share of industrial products rather than agricultural products begin to increase. So the share of jobs that are being created in factories increases over those. So, for example, the US is one of the biggest producers of food in the world, but I think less than 3% Americans work in the agricultural sector. So it's like that. You move out of the farm and you move to the factory. It's also concomitant with urbanization. You move from the village to the city, you move from the farm to the factory. Then the next stage in development is that you move from the factory to the office. And so you move from agriculture to manufacturing, manufacturing to services. And so what you're seeing in the case of China is that it is also the share of the services, which is above 55% now for China, is increasing. And then if you see the United States, the same thing has happened. In 2000, 15% of American GDP was coming from manufacturing. Today it comes from 2025. But in terms of numbers, see, this is an important figure that you need to understand, that if you look at just the dollar amount, in dollar amount for China, in 2000, it was just 387 billion. And now it is $4.79 trillion. That is the huge thing. So China's dollar share of GDP has gone 12 times more, from 387 billion to $4.8 trillion. But the share of that has gone down from 32% to 24%. So when China had $380 billion manufacturing output, that was 32% of the economy, which means the economy was about $1 trillion. That's it, in 2000. But now the economy is $20 trillion, and the GDP and the share of manufacturing is just 25% at 4.8. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that even that China has become a developed country, and like the United States, manufacturing is growing, but the pace at which services are growing is much, much faster. That is the observation that I wanted to share. So if you look at the United States, the US in 2000, with 15% of the share of its national GDP coming from manufacturing, when it was globally dominant. Remember, I told you about 1 out of 4 items was produced at $1.5 trillion, which is about 15% of the US GDP. This was 26% of the global GDP. So roughly only $6 trillion of manufacturing was taking place in the world in 2000. But today, 25 years later, the US has doubled in dollar terms. So 1.5 trillion to $3 trillion. But in terms of share, it has gone from 15 to 9.7, and the global share has also declined. So what this tells me is that the US is not growing in terms of manufacturing at the same pace as China or others, but manufacturing is growing in the United States. If you look at India, also a significant growth. In 2000, India had only $70 billion in manufacturing. And its manufacturing share was 15% of the global of Indian economy. In 2010, it was 285 billion. So India's economy quadrupled in terms of manufacturing in 10 years, 70 to 280. But that was 17%. So you can see that percentage also rise. And so in 2010, India's manufacturing share was 17%. But today it is about 14%, and with $600 billion. So India's dollar amount has tripled, but the share of India's GDP in manufacturing is going down, which tells you that India's manufacturing is not growing at the same pace as its services industry is growing. So is that a problem? So now this question, so if you're looking at the chart that I'm showing currently, you would tell me that, Professor Khan, the trend is the same for every country. In terms of dollars, there seems to be a significant climb in the share in manufacturing, even in the US. US has doubled from 1.5 to $3 trillion. China has gone like from 380 billion to $4.8 trillion. Huge. And the same thing even for Japan. And the same for India. India's share of the national GDP is decreasing, but its global ranking has gone up. It was not there in the top 10. Now it is number 5 in the world, even though it's only 3% of the global manufacturing, but still number 5. That means there are only 4 countries in the world which produce more than 3% of the global manufacturing, which means that except for the concentration in the top, Japan, not even Japan is now at just 5%. So it's basically China and the US together are contributing today about 50% of the global manufacturing still, roughly 30 plus 16, 17, so about 46, 47%. So half of the things that are made in the world are still made in the US and China, and the rest of it is made in the 200 other countries that we have. But this is the point that is important to understand, that if you look at the list of the top 10 countries or the top 5 countries, China, US, Germany, Japan, and India, the top 4 countries are economically developed. They are what we call as high-income economies. The poorest country in the top 5 is China, with about $15,000 GDP per capita. Then Japan at 35, and then Germany is at 50, and the US is over $90,000 per capita. These are really very rich and very advanced and developed countries. So it makes sense that in these countries, the services is growing up. India is not a developed country. India's goal is to become Viksit Bharat, or developed country, in 2047. So what it means is that India has a hole in its development trajectory. All of these countries have gone from the farm to the factory to the office steadily. And you can see in the last 25 years, we've seen that happen to China too. It went from the farm in the 80s. It moved from the farm to the factory, and then the factory became globally dominant. And now more and more people are going well towards AI, DeepSeek, TikTok, and services also. But in the case of India, India is faltering at the second step. And that is a problem that India needs to first become a manufacturing and continue to grow as a manufacturing economy, even if the services grow faster. So you're seeing some growth in manufacturing in India, but not at the pace that the other countries showed. So that is why we have this reverse trend where nearly 60 million people have gone back. So India went from 17% share GDP to 14%, which is a real decline because people left the cities and went to the villages and started working in agriculture. So the biggest job creator after services is not factories but farmland. And that is a big problem for Indian economy. And we'll talk about that in greater detail when we talk to the economist, Dr. Santosh Mehrotra. But the point that I wanted to make with a couple of things, which is that at least in the nominal terms, we see that in the top 10 share, only 2 BRICS countries are there, which means that Russia, South Africa, and Brazil are not doing their share to come. India and China are in the top 5. But Brazil has dropped out of the top 10. Russia is not a major African not a major manufacturing country, and South Africa, well, it's not even in the top 20 these days. In fact, if it was not an important African country, it would not even be invited to G20 anymore. So that is what. Final summary. G7 economies still seem to matter. They are still manufacturing. China has gone stupendously incredible, dominant power. China's dominance today is more than the United States' dominance in 2000. And it seems to be rising. We will take a look again in 2030 at these numbers and see how they fare. So anyway, thank you for watching Conversations. If you have not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share this video with your socio-political network. Until next time, I'm your host Muqtada Khan. Take care.